Green means go. If this is your first time with us, you picked a great morning to come. We're starting a brand new series called Guardrails. And I think we understand guardrails from a standpoint of the highway. But just in case you don't, guardrails, it's a system designed to keep vehicles from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas. Now, my wife and I, we lived in the mountains for quite a few years. And my wife is, let's just say she's cautious. And I'm typically not as cautious, but she loves guardrails. In fact, there were some passes and some mountain passes that she was like, they need a guardrail right there because, it brought her a sense of safety. It brought her a sense of, security. I'm within the bounds, and as long as there's a guardrail, I feel like, that I'm safe and that I'm in a good spot. And what's interesting about guardrails is they're always placed, I don't know if you've noticed this, they're always placed in the safety zone, not in the danger zone, right? And we see guardrails on bridges, we see guardrails in curves on the road, and we see guardrails when there's oncoming traffic, and to protect us from oncoming traffic and to protect them from us, right? And but they're always in the danger zone and beyond the danger zone. But the guardrails are placed where it's safe. If there wasn't a guardrail there, you could potentially drive where the guardrail's at. But none of us are upset that the guardrails are actually in the safety zone, not in the danger zone, right? I mean, we're okay with that. But here's the thing, they're designed to minimize damage. Right? I mean, I may hit the guardrail with my car, but at least it saved me from what was beyond the guardrail, because beyond the guardrail, that's disaster. That's I may total my car going into the guardrail, but man, that's catastrophic on the other side of the guardrail. So it protected me from going to whatever was beyond the other side of the guardrail. But here's what sometimes I guess maybe we don't realize is the highway isn't the only place where we need guardrails. We really need guardrails. If you're going to live a successful Christian life, if you're going to successfully follow Jesus through this life, you're going to need a healthy set of guardrails. And especially in our world, in the everything that we've got going on, and the electronics that we have going on, I'm telling you what, my phone, I just updated from, which I thought the 6S was a fine phone. Apparently, that's ancient, and so it finally kind of went kaput, and so I got an iPhone, but it only has two cameras, three. I don't know how. I don't even know how to use the one, but it's got some cameras on it, and but that little device has the power to destroy every single one of us in this room and everybody watching. It does, and you can access it like that. You can access it so fast, and we're as adults, I'm having a hard time. I'm realizing I need guardrails with this little device, and we're sticking them in the hands of children who have no idea about guardrails. See, it's not just the roadways, and we understand in the roadways, but when it comes to living life, if we're going to live it successfully, we need some guardrails. But here's the thing, and I'm sure you already know this, culture doesn't encourage guardrails. In fact, culture wants you to live right on the edge. They're going to encourage you. Our culture will encourage every single one of us to live on the edge. And they will mock us if we have guardrails that help us live back away from the edge and say, oh, come on, you should live right on the edge. But then if you fall off the edge, you fall off the edge financially, you fall off the edge morally, you fall off the edge ethically, oh my gosh, they're going to mock you for falling off the edge. But they want us to live at a place where it's not a matter of if we're going to fall off, it's just a matter of when. See, our culture is not going to help us. See, our culture is content with painted lines. Just painted lines, not a guardrail to protect us, just kind of a painted line in a gray general area, but nothing really concrete of, hey, don't go beyond here because that's catastrophic. You go beyond there. Let me give you some examples. Here's some painted lines in our culture. Drink responsibly. Drink responsibly. And I'm not saying this is a bad idea or bad advice. I'm just saying, if I've drunk, if that's the painted line, if that's the guardrail, by the time I've drunk to the place where I'm not sure if I'm being responsible or not, I think I've just left the area of responsibility, right? It's kind of like, that's not a guardrail. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying that's not a guardrail. That's just a painted line. And when I get to the painted line, I don't even care if I'm responsible anymore. So our culture is just like, no, don't put a guardrail there. Just drink responsibly. Here's another one. Consolidate your debts. You should have debt, and you should have debt in every area of your life. But if it gets out of control, just consolidate them from time to time. Consolidate it and add some more. Consolidate it and add some more. That's the painted line our culture wants you to live on. And then, if you fall off that line, how in the world? But it's a painted line. That is not a guardrail for, managing your finances. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying that's not a guardrail. That's not a guardrail for us in our financial world. Here's another one in regards to sex. Wait until you're ready. Now, I'm pretty sure that some women got together and came up with this, and that's not a knock on women. I'm just thinking, if we're going to go up and tell a teenage boy, wait until you're ready, I was born ready, right? I mean, that's not a guardrail. That's not a guardrail. It's like, wait until you're ready. Okay. I don't see that happening. But anyway, and it's not a terrible idea. It's just not really a guardrail. It's just a painted line. Here's my favorite. Listen to your heart. That's why I was born ready. Because I was listening to my heart. And it told me I was ready, so I'm ready. Right? So it's terrible advice. So that's a painted line. And I don't know, maybe if any of you have heard of the Billy Graham rule. Any of you remember Billy Graham? Any of you have no idea? You're like, I ain't raising my hand. If you don't know who Billy Graham is, ask your parents. So it's amazing to me. We could be getting into an area where there's some, never heard of him, have no idea who that guy is. But Billy Graham had a rule, and it kind of became, known as the Billy Graham rule. And unfortunately, in some circles, it maybe has taken on some not so great things. But Billy Graham had a rule, and it kind of became known as his rule, where he would not meet with, eat with, travel with a woman alone. Wouldn't meet with them in a room alone without a window and the door, or some window that people could observe what was going on. He just wouldn't eat alone, wouldn't travel alone, wouldn't meet alone with a woman. And that was a guardrail for him to protect himself from being stupid. And so Mike Pence, our previous vice president, he adopted the Billy Graham rule. Well, he just got eviscerated in the media when they found out that he kind of operated with those same guardrails, because how dare you, do that? And so the Harvard Business Review actually wrote an article, and the name of the article was "Why Men Should Not Meet with Women Alone." And so they came out with this article, and there were some fair points, because taken in the wrong way, it has kept some women from advancing in the business world. And so I'm not going to completely diss the article because it made some good points. And in the middle of the article is almost like the writers of the article was like, it could be potentially harmful if a married man and a married woman, is working together late at night and traveling together and eating together, that the potential for something, that neither one of them would set out and say, hey, this is what we want to do, could happen. And so they came up with some points for some guys. And so the Harvard Business Review wrote this specifically to guys. And so here's one of the points that they made that would be helpful for us guys. So what's an evolved male leader to do? In the simplest terms, become what we call a thoughtful caveman. Okay, I don't know how that's helpful for me, but I don't mind being called an evolved, thoughtful caveman. I guess that's better than an evolved, unthoughtful caveman. But I find this so interesting that, and it really doesn't bother me to be called a caveman, but I don't think we ever talk about cave women. And I think there were cave women. Don't you think there was cave women? And I don't know that thoughtful and caveman really go together. So that's not really typically very helpful for me. And so they had another point. Healthy, mature, self-aware men understand and accept their distinctly male neural architecture. I'm not sure I even understand that sentence. I didn't know I had a male neural architecture, but apparently I do. Now, I'm not saying this isn't true, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, this is true, okay? Now, ladies, all the ladies in the room, all you ladies watching in your living room, if you could answer this for me. How many of these do you know? See, you're like, if we could find one of those, we should take him in and study him. Because he's a unicorn, right? I mean, these guys don't need guardrails. But the 99.999% of the rest of us, we probably should use some guardrails. Right? So, healthy, mature, self-aware men, they're hard to find. And so, the point is, if you opt for guardrails, you will not be celebrated. You will not. In fact, the guys at work, they're going to make fun of you. They will. You are not going to be celebrated for having guardrails, but you'll have fewer regrets. I guarantee you that. So the Jewish scripture, the Old Testament, they had guardrails and standards and rules and things to follow. And the New Testament, it has, the same kind of things and of saying, here's kind of some guardrails and ways to protect your life. And today is just kind of an introductory to this series. And so we're gonna drill down and kind of give you an example of one area, but we're gonna come back around and look at some of these specific areas where we could, really have some guardrails. And if we don't, man alive, it's catastrophic if we, just blast right through a painted line. And so the Apostle Paul, he writes this letter to some Jesus followers in Ephesus, and he talks to them about all of the benefits of following Jesus. And because of that, because of the spiritual riches that they receive as a part of following Jesus, here's some guardrails, or here's some things to help them live successfully a Christian life. And so he says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 15, so if you have your paper Bibles, you can open those. If you have it on your phone, you can look at that. He says, so be careful how you live. Be careful, be calculated. Calculate how you live. Think about it. Like, don't Don't just live by the seat of your pants. You need to be careful. We live in a dangerous, dangerous culture that wants you to fall off the edge. They want you to live right here, and they will mock you for living back away from it, and they will mock you when you fall off. And there's not a whole lot of grace in either one of those in our culture. So he says, you got to be careful. You got to be calculated in how you live. He goes on, don't live like fools. Now, foolish people live as if today is not connected to tomorrow. I can live however I want to live and do whatever I want to do with whoever I want to do it with, wherever I want to do it, and I can do whatever I want, and whatever I do today isn't connected to tomorrow. See, a fool doesn't realize there's a consequence for what I do today in terms of what happens tomorrow. Fool doesn't make that connection. He says, but live like those who are wise. Wise people understand there's a connection between what I do today and the decisions that I make today and what tomorrow is going to look like. In terms of my finances, in terms of my work, in terms of my ethic, in terms of my family, in terms of my marriage. What I do today and the decisions I make today and the guardrails I place around me, because I understand I have the propensity to be stupid. And so if I don't back away from the edge, then I could make an emotional decision right here if I'm going to live at this painted line and not have a guardrail. I could have an emotional decision that tomorrow, I'm going to regret that. And so Paul just says, hey, you need to know wisdom serves as the decision-making template for Jesus followers. And we're going to look at this in a specific subject area in just a second and see where the church gets it wrong. And maybe if you're here today and you're not a Jesus follower, you're watching, you're not a Jesus follower, this could be one of the reasons why you're not, and we get it wrong so many times. We're going to look at that. But wisdom serves as the decision-making template for Jesus followers. What's wise for me in terms of a certain area may not be, have anything to do with someone else. So the wisdom that applies to me doesn't necessarily apply to everyone else. And we're going to look at that in just a second. So he goes on in Ephesians 5:16, says, make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Redeem the time because the culture isn't going to help you. How much time have we wasted with our little devices because we didn't have a guardrail around it? And our time is going down a rat hole. It didn't do us any good. And we didn't do anyone else any good. And how much time are we spending with these technological devices? He just says, make the most of every opportunity. The culture's not going to help you, just so you know. It's going to be difficult. And if you don't have good guardrails, you're basically going to give your life away to things you don't necessarily want to give your life away to. And so he says, don't act thoughtlessly. I mean, that's the opposite of living carefully. It's the opposite of living calculated. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. And I love this because this is actually a command. This is an imperative right here. Understand, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm commanding all of you, understand. Like you can't command someone to understand if they don't understand. You can't just say, understand, and they're like, oh, well, since you're commanding me to understand, now I understand, right? I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. So what is Paul saying? This is what he's saying. Be honest with yourself. Don't deceive yourself. Be honest with yourself. Don't deceive yourself. You know where you're dancing on the line, don't you? You know where you're flirting with danger. You know where you should be living back here and you're living right on the edge and you know it. Don't you? You're watching online? you know exactly where you're flirting with danger. And Paul's just saying, understand what the will of the Lord is. Understand what he wants you to do. You know. You know, and I know. We know, don't we? And yet, there's part of us that, I don't really want a guardrail because part of me likes living right here. Part of me wants to live right here. And so he just says, hey, understand. Don't be dancing on the line. Don't deceive yourself. And then he's going to kind of give us an example, and this example is like a one thing leads to another example. One thing leads to another example. And there's a lot of things in life where one thing leads to another. And if I don't have guardrails, here's what happens. I'm living on the edge, and one thing leads to another thing. See, I let one thing come in that if I had a guardrail, I wouldn't have let that come in. But since I didn't have the guardrail, I let it come in, and now it's going to lead me to another thing. And that another thing is going to lead me off the edge. Guardrails keep us from the one thing that leads to the other. That's what guardrails do. So, Paul's going to give us an example. Some of you are going to hate this example. Some of you are going to love this example. And so we're going to jump in. I'm glad we're able to look at these verses because maybe we can bring some clarity to an area in Christendom that has been so misunderstood, misapplied in both directions. So, you ready? All right, here we go. Don't be drunk with wine. Dadgummit, why did I come to church today, right? I mean, so here's the thing. This is so interesting. In our culture, but even in the church swings the pendulum to one side or the other and doesn't really, because we don't like wisdom as the template for decision making. We don't like wisdom because we can't really control that, and that's different from one person to the next. We like legalism. What's good for me is, my personal preference, I'm pretty sure is God's personal preference, and since my personal preference is God's personal preference, then it's everybody's, and it should be that way for all people in all places and all times. That's what we do, and we swing the pendulum. So here's an example. In the tradition I grew up in, I was taught, not by my parents, but by other Sunday school teachers, I was taught that in the first century, that the wine was actually like our grape juice. Now, so just so you know, it was kind of watered down. And in the first century, water wasn't safe. That's why they made wine, because wine was safe and water was not. Wine could make you drunk, and that was the part that was left out. But water could make you dead. So, in the first century, they drank a lot of wine. So, but I was taught it was kind of like our grape juice, so it wasn't really like wine. And the Bible forbids drinking of any kind. That is the pendulum swung to one side that's not true. Because the New Testament doesn't teach that. Now, so what do? We're like, well, it doesn't teach that, and so we're going to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, right? And this is an area where I tell you what, in our culture in Nebraska, this is a big area, right? Because everybody loves to drink. There's a lot of drinking going on. But here's what I see. If there's any area where if you're swung to this side and you kind of like alcohol and that's kind of your deal and you love that, here's an area where I see a lot of deception. We deceive ourselves. And you know what I see? I see drinking buddies making jokes about drinking so that they can have their buddies around them to cover for them as to what's actually real and not wise. So we cover for one another and we deceive one another so that we can continue to do what's not wise. So that's the other pendulum. And Paul just says, if you want to know what the scriptural guardrail is, it is don't be drunk. Not drink, but don't be drunk. That's the guardrail. And then use wisdom. Here's the thing. Drinking for me is no problem. I have never been drunk, and I don't like this stuff. It's like, and I've tried it. I mean, my wife and I, we when we got married, we had a honeymoon suite in this hotel at the Denver airport. It was Stapleton Airport. That ought to age me a little bit. So we're up in like the 6th floor of this hotel, and there's a champagne bottle, and we're like, sweet. So we pour us some. Disgusting. That's awful. So we went out on the balcony and did the NASCAR thing and shot it all off of the balcony. So not a problem for me. See, it's easy for me to have wisdom in this area. I guarantee you, I won't get to this point. But some of you know this is the goal, right? That's the goal. And Paul just says, if you're going to live successfully, you just need to know, for some of you, you probably shouldn't start because the ability for you to be wise once you started isn't there. And I have some friends who, used to do this, and it was ruining their life and ruining the lives around them. And for them, they just got it. It's not wise for them to even touch it. It's not wise for them to even touch it. Now, it would be easier for the church to just come out with a rule and just say, nobody could drink, right? And that's what, legalism does. It's hard to say, use wisdom. For some, they shouldn't even touch it. For others, they're fine. But the scriptures would teach, hey, be careful and understand who might be around you, because if it's okay for you and you realize they struggle with it, you're going to lead them to a place that you shouldn't lead them. So he says, don't be drunk with wine because, well, what do you think? You know the because, don't you? Because you've been there when a girl got punched in the face. You've been there when someone veered off the road. You've been there when the wife was getting beaten. See, that's when the pendulum swings over here and we deceive ourselves and we do some jokes, but we're not going to really be honest. Don't be drunk. Don't go beyond here, because it will ruin your life. And it will. It will ruin your marriage. It will ruin your workplace. It will ruin your friendships. It will ruin your family. And so this is an area where Paul just says, hey, this might be an area where you want to use some wisdom and some guardrails. I'm not saying you can't drink. That's not it. The guardrail is, don't be drunk. Now, it's gotten really quiet in here. One last thing on the drinking thing. If more than one person has told you you drink too much, you do. You got it? If more than one person has told you you drink too much, you drink too much. And you should do something about that. And you should put some guardrails in that. All right, back to Paul. All right, if more than one... Here's the thing. Don't be drunk with wine, because that will ruin your life. Instead, be filled with the Holy Spirit. So what he's going to say is, look, listen, as Jesus followers, We are to be controlled by the Spirit of God. And if we allow control to be taken by anything or anybody else, that is sin. And we shouldn't let that happen. We should have a guardrail that keeps us from allowing something or someone else to control us. That's why the scriptural guardrail in terms of alcohol is don't be drunk, because you lose control of yourself. And you're no longer able to allow the Spirit of God to be in control of you. Guardrails safeguard us from handing over control of our lives to someone or something else besides Christ. So here's the thing. As we move forward, nobody plans to ruin their life. Right? Nobody plans to do that. They just don't plan not to. Guardrails are how you plan not to. So this whole series, it's not really about, becoming a better Jesus follower or following the rules better. It's not about that. It's about how do we become more surrendered Jesus followers. So Crossing, where do you need to start? Where do you need to start? And for some of you, it might be, I don't even have a relationship with Jesus. And if that's you watching, if that's you in-house, I would love to talk to you about that and invite you into that relationship, because I tell you what, it is in that place where everything becomes ordered in your life and it has its proper place, and you can live with wisdom and guardrails, and you will minimize the regrets that you have in your life. That's my hope and my prayer for you. So if that's you, I would love to talk to you after the service. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for our time this morning. Thank you for the guardrails that you give us. God, sometimes we take those and we place what we want on top of them, and we dictate that guardrail based on what we want. I pray, God, that we would instead surrender to you and ask you, what do you want? And God, today as we talk about alcohol, it's like, oh man, for some it's a downer. For others, they're mad because I didn't tell everyone it's wrong. And so God, I pray that we would be more surrendered to you, and we would be honest with what the New Testament teaches. And God, I pray that you would help us, if we don't have guardrails in that area, that you would help us to be honest with ourselves as to, for me, based on past experiences, based on current circumstances, based on future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing for me to do? God, would you help us to be honest with ourselves and answer that and then act on it? I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.